What do you fear? Home invaders? Dark and seedy underworlds? Or maybe unknown beings far beyond our comprehension? The Door series covers all of this and more over the course of its 3 entries. Each one has its own distinct feeling and atmosphere that gives such a short series a lot of variety. My name is Duncan Shea, and today we are going to talk about the recently rediscovered hidden gem of Japanese horror. Let's open up the Door series. For those of you that are just joining the channel, or maybe it's been a while, this is the first in our cursed series of J-Horror videos. J-Horror Month is a yearly tradition where I talk about anything horror and Japan related every week in October. And we're starting off this year by diving into some underseen gems. So, if you like what you see, think about sticking around and subscribing. To understand what Door is and why it experienced the success that it did, we have to first talk about where it came from. Door was produced by the Directors Company, which is a film production company with a simple goal: putting directors first. You could probably tell that by the name. Notable members of the Directors Company include Shinji Somai, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, and Gakuryu Ishii, although that was when he was known as Sogo Ishii. Not to mention today's subject, Banmei Takahashi. Takahashi has mostly worked in pinku films, Japan's softcore hard art subgenre. Pinku is a subject that we're going to come back to later in the month for a different video, but for now, all you really need to know is that the genre is mostly sleazier exploitation films. In addition to Takahashi, Door was also co-written by Ataru Oikawa, who would later write a pair of Tomie movies and the live-action Higurashi movies. Maybe it was Oikawa's influence that drove Takahashi to switch from erotic films into horror, maybe it wasn't. Either way, Door was completely different than anything that Takahashi had done before. And if I'm being honest, Door is also a lot different than what came after. But let's break down the plot first. Yasuko lives in an apartment with her son and husband, or at least she would if her husband was ever around. An unfortunate visit by a door-to-door salesman leaves Yasuko terrified, and soon after she worries that she now has a stalker. Yasuko lives in fear of suspicious phone calls. She jumps whenever there's a knock at her door, until finally, her worst fears become a reality. I'm leaving it at a very short plot synopsis because, at its core, Door is a pretty simple but immensely effective movie. Our lead lady is played by Takahashi's own wife, Keiko, and largely is what makes this film work. Yasuko is a sexually frustrated housewife, whose life becomes infinitely worse with the introduction of her stalker, Yamakawa, played by Daijiro Tsutsumi. Tsutsumi is more known for his music career than acting, being somewhat of a pretty face rock idol when he was cast in Door. At the time, it was a far cry from what most audiences would expect a stalker to look like. With her husband's absence, Yamakawa's teasing comments get under Yasuko's skin all too easily, and it really gives Door this feeling of sexual repression. After all, this is a movie being made by a pinku director that lacks any sort of nudity. You can almost feel the film holding itself back on a meta level. Door is a very hard film to nail down. It's a sort of proto-home invasion movie, but that invasion really doesn't happen till the end of the movie. It's kind of shot like a giallo, with the killer POV and shots of shiny knives. However, it lacks any mystery to it. Is it a drama? No, not really. It leans too hard into horror and other genre tropes for that. What Door is a slow burn. Shots linger on handles, entrances, and that lingering sense of repression turns into a sense of tension that you can cut with a knife. And just when you think that you can't take anymore, all hell breaks loose. This is without a doubt Door's most memorable scene, or maybe it'll be its second most for some people. An overhead shot of the entire apartment as it's torn to pieces. Without a doubt, it's an incredible feat for cinematographer Yasushi Sasakibara, who would later shoot movies like Violent Cop and a channel favorite, Gonin. But the film decides to one-up itself and deliver a memorable and satisfying death scene for Yamakawa that's so brutal that Japanese rating boards actually tried to cut it. And because of that, there's also no way I could show it here on YouTube. So you're just gonna have to watch the movie yourself to see it. Yamakawa's death is the release that Yasuko and the film had been looking for from the start. Now with all the repression and angst gone, Takahashi was free to move on and get back to its roots with the extremely sexually liberated Door 2.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
Door was released alongside another Japanese cult horror film, Evil Dead Trap. However, in theaters, Door did very poorly, and while Evil Dead Trap went on to be remembered, Door did not reach the same heights. Thankfully, it became a big hit on VHS, likely due to the crossover appeal with horror films released as V-Cinema, or direct-to-VHS movies. This success led Tokuma Japan Communications to acquire the rights for the Door name, and they decided to slap it onto Takahashi's latest film, Tokyo Diary. The result is 1991's Door 2, Tokyo Diary, a film that is so vastly removed from the original Door that it might not even be a horror movie, and strangely enough, I might have loved it for that. But before we get into that, let's jump into the plot. Door 2, Door Harder, is about Ai, a call girl with a strange assortment of customers. She does her best to fulfill her customers' every request, but the further and further she delves into this dark world, the more and more violent these requests become. Ai navigates her way around Tokyo's seedy underbelly and desperately tries not to lose herself in the process. Door was about sexual frustration, held back until it can be released in a violent explosion. Door 2 is filled with sex scenes and sex workers. Door was a confined story, held within the walls of a small apartment. Door 2 is anything but that. Ai gets around all of Tokyo and into a series of increasingly dangerous situations. See, Tokyo Diary is honestly more about vibes than about plot. Ai's clients provide neat little stories that hardly add up to a whole narrative, but almost feel like strange and real anecdotes that a call girl would have. The closest thing we have to a plot is Ai's tense relationship with a man named Mamiya. Mamiya is rich, controlling, but also alluring to Ai, who falls deeper and deeper into his world. Much like Door's Yamakawa, Mamiya is played by another musical talent, Joe Yamanaka. In addition to being in a Japanese rock band, Yamanaka was also known for his acting and charity work. In fact, his life story sounds insane, so you should probably look it up sometime. For now, let's get back to Door 2. Ai's clientele includes Nazi cosplayers, foot fetishists, and the old man from Ikidu. Well, not the literal old man from Ikidu, but in a plot point that seems to be a deliberate reference to the Kurosawa classic, an old man with a terminal disease offers to spend his fortune on Ai, not for sex, but just to spend time with him. On first watch, this is when most people would think that the plot would kick in, that this is going to turn into an entirely different type of movie.
私と付き合ってくれ。え？女房はもう死んでいない。全部使い切りたい。だが、何に使っていいか、何をしたらいいかよくわからん。いいけど。そうか。
セックスできますか？セックスできなきゃ困ります。
Turns out, while she's in this business for the money, she also is in it for the sex. And so the offer has no appeal to her. And this was when I started to see Ai as a fuller character, and not just a two-dimensional sex hooligan. See, Door 2 is more of an introspective character study about a girl that gets in over her head in the sex industry. In fact, our previous lead actress, Keiko Takahashi, makes a cameo to tell Ai that if she continues working as a prostitute, she's going to get hurt. Worth noting that this is the only returning member of Door's cast, and she's playing a totally different character. As if it wasn't already apparent that Door 2 was a completely unrelated movie when it started production. And while Ai does eventually get hurt in what might be one of the most nerve-wracking scenes in the whole franchise, the movie continues on from that. The point was never to have Ai quit being a prostitute. In fact, the film doesn't even admonish her for her career. Instead, the movie moves on. We get back to exploring her increasingly more volatile relationship with Mamiya, but even after that's resolved, the movie keeps going, because it was never about any of those things. It was about exploring the life of a sex worker and the life of this character in Tokyo. Instead of being a tense stalker horror, Door 2 is an introspective art house drama, and a pretty good one at that. It would also be the last Door film that Takahashi directed. The next film in the Door series would go in an entirely different direction, with an entirely unexpected crew.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
Door 3 is without a doubt the strangest and most mysterious entry into the franchise. It's completely unrelated to the director's company or Takahashi, just sort of showed up out of nowhere. Though if I had to guess, it was probably another completely unrelated film that got the Door title attached to it. The biggest draw is the creative team behind it, most notably director Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Famously known for Cure and Pulse, Kurosawa is a master of Japanese horror, and it's sort of insane that it's taken me this long to talk about him on the channel. And despite this being earlier than both of those movies, Kurosawa was already well versed in horror before Door 3, having directed Sweet Home and Guard from the Underground, the latter of which actually was a director's company film. So maybe that's where the Door connection actually comes in. Who knows? But the other big name attached to this entry is Chiaki J. Konaka, writer of Serial Experiments Lane, Big O, and one of my personal favorite horror movies, Marebito. At the time, Konaka was entrenched writing horror and sci-fi for the direct-to-video and TV markets. Before Door 3, he had already completed his cult Blade Runner-like hit Armitage III. He was also a notable writer in Japan's Cthulhu mythos circles, and even wrote a TV adaptation of Shadows over Innsmouth, which I may have covered a few J-horror months ago. This is also sort of relevant to Door 3, but before I get into that, let's get into the plot. Miyako is an insurance saleswoman whose luck seems to be running out. She used to top the sales charts and now is struggling to break even. While other women seduce men to boost their sales numbers, Miyako takes pride in never stooping to that level. But she might have to do just that when she encounters a young but strange CEO named Mitsuru. As she gets closer to him, weird things start to occur around Miyako. Women start following her, her friends start to go missing, all while Miyako becomes further entangled with Mitsuru, leading her to discover his true identity. The vibe of Door 3 is very 90s Japan, oh shit, the economic bubble burst, but now what? And that's a vibe that's actually very in line with Konaka's cyberpunk work, at least thematically. It also makes you really feel for Miyako, seeing her struggle with her career. Miyako is, in some ways, a midpoint between Door's Yasuko and Door 2's Ai. She can flirt to get what she wants, but she won't go all the way for the sake of her pride. She's more sexual than Yasuko ever was, but she's nowhere near as much of a free spirit like Ai. As Miyako gets closer to Mitsuru, she begins to attract unwanted attention from other women. And in a way, this gives Door 3 that stalker horror vibe that the original Door had. But like Tokyo Diary, Door 3 is expanded in scope. In fact, its scope is so vast that it goes further than any other Door film has gone before, reaching all the way into cosmic horror. Spoilers? I guess. The mysterious man that Miyako is interested in turns out to be a parasitic alien that's infected a whole harem of women, and has his sights set on Miyako next. And given that Mitsuru is a weird sex parasite, you could almost read Door 3 as an allegory for sexual abuse. Miyako is being pressured into using sex to gain new clients, at the same time as she is being pressured to fall under Mitsuru's power. You could draw parallels, but if I'm being honest, the film doesn't lean much into this aspect, and that's fine. It keeps Door 3 much lighter, making it a mostly fun and creepy watch. This supernatural element really gives Door 3 its own distinct identity. The film is the most overtly horror-y of the franchise, and that's due in no small part to Kurosawa. You can see a lot of techniques that he would employ later in Cure and Pulse in Door 3. Long, foreboding shots, danger just out of focus, mysterious women in red. It's a real treat if you know Kurosawa's later filmography. But I do feel like this film lacks a certain punch at the end, one that the other Doors and Kurosawa's later films delivered on. The climax is very dialogue heavy, without much action, and maybe that's just a limitation of budget. It doesn't help that the only copy available on the internet is a VHS rip and I can't see what's going on clearly. So who knows, a better transfer might make this whole scene more engaging, but it's still an early Kei Kurosawa film, and for that it's neat, and it reminds you why he is one of the best in the biz.
Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
I would have loved to see the Door series continue on into a franchise of completely unrelated movies that just get the title slapped on them during production. But as it stands, these three are pretty neat on their own, and definitely worth checking out. Plus, because of the way that they were made, you could really watch the series in any order. In fact, I started with 3 just because I really was interested in Kurosawa and Konaka, but also because it was the only one available to me at the time. Since then, Third Window Films did a fantastic job putting the first 2 out on a Blu-ray. Ironically, it's now much easier to find those movies than the third. And if you want to see where these movies are streaming legally for you, I've made a letterbox list so that you can easily look them up. Or do me one better and subscribe to this channel since you've already watched all the way to this point. If you're in the mood this Halloween season for a hidden gem of Japanese horror, then maybe it's time for you to open up the door.